This is Terry Wazier. This is vlog for February 28, 2015. The Portland Police and Multnomah County Sheriffs have a shit ton of sting operatives surrounding this apartment. At the time right now is 12:48 p.m. in the afternoon. Multnomah County Sheriff's Portland Police Department has quite a few people that are in law enforcement and are civilian operatives for law enforcement at these apartments, and they have a multitude of brats that they've brought in for these their sting operations. And you can hear the brats are hanging out in front of my apartment area, in the courtyard area right out here, and they're deliberately out there making pedo accusations, and they deliberately scream, and then they deliberately act like they're running away, but then they come back and then they repeat the process. And they're doing it over and over and over and over again. This is a tactic that the Portland Police and County Sheriffs have used since the 70s, the early 70s. They call it pedophiling. They surround their targets with their undercover police operatives and their civilian operatives, and they use their civilian operatives brats in these type of stings, and they're deliberately staging and faking crimes out there and are deliberately making false accusations. The sting operatives are bringing children to these apartments, and these are one-bedroom apartments. No family with children would live in any of these, either of these two apartment buildings, because these are only one-bedroom apartments. But because it's a sting operation and because they're trying to frame me, they don't have to prove somebody's a bad guy. They just want to make their targets look like a bad guy. So the sting operatives have taken over the surrounding apartments on the far side of the courtyard here, and they've taken over almost virtually this whole building. And they're deliberately, the civilian operatives that they're using, that they select for these type of stings, are the ones that have children, and they bring, they don't live here. None of them live here. They just show up for staged events. Like, I think it's a weekend right now. Let me check real quick. Yeah, it's Saturday. They'll show up here for staged events. Most of these apartments generally tend to be empty, even though the Portland Police and County Sheriffs are renting these empty apartments. For the most part, they're empty. And the sting operatives they'll show up as a group, just like a bunch of picnic nerds will show up at a park. These sting operatives will show up here as a group, and the police and county sheriffs have multiple apartments in this building and that building, and they just pretend to live there, and then they direct their brats to deliberately play games where they're making false accusations. They literally coach the brats to hang out in front of my apartment and to make false accusations and then scream and then run away. And then they come right back, and then they do it again, and then they run away. And then they come right back again, and then they do it, and then they run away. And they repeat this process over and over, and they'll do it for they'll do it for an hour, and then they'll take a break. And a couple hours later, they do it again. I'm not going to go out there because I know damn well they would love nothing more than for me to be out there with a cell phone recording right now. I'll see if you can't hear them doing it. Okay, I don't know if you can hear that or not. but you can hear that the children are out there, and they're like very near my apartment. And like I said, this building right here, and the building that's right across the courtyard, these are one-bedroom apartment buildings. Now, I don't know if this is recording that sound or not, but it sounds like there's children out there playing. Now, keep in mind that they are not in any danger of anything. They're not scared of anything, but they pretend to be. And then they just come back. They do it. It's like a repeated process. The sting operatives will show up as a group, and they take over the multiple apartments, and they bring their brats with them, and then they direct their brats to hang out near my apartment area, and then they deliberately make false accusations, and then they run away. But then they come right back, and then they make false accusations, and then they run away again. And then they come back, and then they make false accusations, and then they run away again, and it's a repeated process. I had prior knowledge that the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family, of which were neighbors of mine when I was a child, they used these tactics to frame innocent people as pedophiles. And they also used officers as photo doubles to impersonate the people that they're framing. In 1971, I was 6 years old in 71, and the Dunham family, which happened to be neighbors of ours at the time, the mother of the Dunham family came over to my house, and she was asking my mother if she could take me with a walk to the park with her children. She claimed that she was taking her children to the park, and she was wondering if she could take me along with her. And my mother agreed. Not suspecting anything. Nothing seemed suspicious about that. Nothing seemed malicious about that. So my mother agreed. This woman was named Darlene Dunham, and she had two of her children with her, one being Kurt Dunham, and she had her daughter with her that was named Tammy Dunham. And Darlene Dunham claimed that she was taking her children to the park, and she was asking my mother if she could take me along with her children, and my mother agreed. So Darlene Dunham took me for a walk. The park was 2 blocks away from where we lived at the time, and she didn't take us to the park. What she did was she took us to a house that was a block away from where I lived, and I was only 6 years old at the time and had no clue as to what the fuck was going on. And Darlene Dunham told her children and told me, once she got me a block away from the house, she told her children and she told me to go across the street and to go play in somebody's such and such house's yard. And she pointed at the house, and being only 6 years old, I didn't understand what the hell was going on, so I just did what I was told. I'm technically being babysitted at this point by Darlene Dunham and under her care. So, I'm not going to argue with her. I didn't understand what's going on, but Darlene Dunham told me and her children to cross the street and to go play in somebody's yard. So we crossed the street and went into these people's yard. I don't even know who the hell these people were. And the moment we were in this yard, there was a county sheriff officer that was in the house of that yard, and this county sheriff officer opened that window, and he was deliberately staying to the side of the window, and he but he had his arm completely visible on the windowsill, you know, resting on the windowsill like that. And he's holding a candy bar like that. And he starts tossing the candy bars into the yard, and Darlene Dunham's children, Kurt Dunham and Tammy Dunham, they were grinning like Cheshire cats, and they began picking up the candy bars. And I didn't understand what the fuck was going on, and, you know, I was confused as to what's going on. I knew they're not my candy bars, so I turned and looked over at Darlene Dunham, who was across the street, and yelled out, asking if I'm supposed to be picking up these candy bars. Because I didn't know if I was or if I was supposed to or what. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And that's when I noticed Darlene Dunham was holding this big green, this was 71, keep that in mind, this is 1971. She was holding a big green, all metal camera, photogenic, that takes photogenic type photos. It was very big, it was very large, has one of those big metal tube things on it where they would have where the flash would be inside of it. She wasn't snapping flash photos because it was broad daylight, so she didn't need flash bulbs for it. But it's one of those big, it looked like those old-fashioned cameras you see in the 1960s in detective movies, or, you know, or whodunit movies where you see, you know, when you see the detectives or you see the news reporters with those big clunky cameras, and they're taking photogenic photos of a crime scene. It looked very similar to that. It was almost as large as those type of a camera. So it was a very noticeable camera. And she was grinning from ear to ear, and she was snapping photogenic photos of me and her children picking up those candy bars that the county sheriff officer was tossing at us out the damn window. And she was grinning from ear to ear, and she said, yeah, go ahead, pick up the candy bars. She was telling them that. She was literally telling us this. So I started picking up candy bars, not really realizing what the hell was going on. I didn't know what was going on. I was only 6 years old. I had no understanding or concept of crime. I sure as hell had no understanding. I had a sense of right or wrong, but I didn't realize that somebody was being framed by this incident. I had no idea. I was only 6 at the time, so. And this went on for about 5 minutes. And the entire time, this county sheriff officer was tossing out these candy bars out the window. The entire time, Darlene Dunham was taking photogenic photos of it. And she was grinning from ear to ear the entire time while she was doing this. And when the county sheriff officer ran out of candy bars, he said, that's it, there's no more. And then he shut the window. And he intentionally and deliberately prevented his body from getting in front of the window. The only thing that stayed visible was his arm. He had his arm resting on the windowsill like that the whole time while he holds a candy bar, kind of like that. You know, he had his arm resting in the damn windowsill, and he's holding candy bars like that. And then he would hold his arm there like that, and then he would go like this for a little bit, and then he would go whoosh and then toss the candy bar. And he was deliberately doing this very slowly because Darlene Dunham was taking photogenic photos of it. When he got done, he said he was done. He closed the window, and that's when Darlene Dunham yelled at her children and for me to come back across the street back to her. From this point, Darlene Dunham was taking me back home from this point forward. And from this point forward, they were all in celebration mode. The entire Dunham family was in celebration mode. They're acting like they just won the Super Bowl or something. That kind of a celebration mode. And they were grinning, and they were smirking, and they were laughing, and they were openly referring to the person that lived there at that house. On this walk back, as they're taking me back home, they were openly and in front of me referring to the person that lived there as a pedophile. I was only 6 years old at the time. I had no idea what the fuck a pedophile even was. They might as well have said astronaut. I didn't know what the hell an astronaut was back then either. So that should, I had no understanding of what really they were talking about at the time. I never forgot what happened because it was unforgettable. That was my introduction day to the Dunham family. For me, it was an unforgettable day. I didn't understand what was going on. I was constantly asking questions. When Darlene Dunham and her children were walking me back home, I was asking them about, the camera that Darlene Dunham had. I would ask her if I could hold it for her because I was curious. I'd never seen a camera like that before. I was a very curious, inquisitive little kid, and I was constantly asking questions because I was completely clueless. I knew they're celebrating, and I didn't know why they're celebrating. So I was constantly asking questions as to what the fuck's going on because I just didn't understand any of it. I had no understanding of any of the things that they were doing and the things that they were saying. I asked them, what's a pedophile? And they just grinned and smirked at me, and then they just ignored my question and changed the subject. And then they started talking about how after they dropped me off at home, they're going to go out for a pizza. And so they were basically talking about celebrating what they just done, basically. And I was only 6, so I didn't know what the hell a pizza was at the time. And remember, keep in mind, this was 1971. Most people that had TVs back in those days had black and white TVs. And at the time, when I was 6 years old, we didn't even have a TV back in 1971. I don't think we bought a TV until later that year or the very next year. I don't even know if Pizza Hut even had commercials back in '71. I don't think they did. I don't recall Pizza Hut commercials as back when I was a small kid. So I had no understanding. I knew what a hamburger joint was, a burger joint was. I knew what restaurants were. I knew what hamburgers were. I knew what French fries were. I had no clue what a pizza was. My parents never took me out for a pizza. So back in 1971, pizzas weren't as popular as they are now. I think pizzas was a relatively new fad in 1971, where it didn't really fully take off yet as a popular fast food. So I had no idea what a pizza was. So I'm like, what's a pizza? I was a very inquisitive kid. I didn't know. I was constantly asking questions because I was trying to figure out what's going on. I asked Darlene Dunham if I could hold the camera for her because I was curious. I wanted to get a close look at it, and I wanted to see how heavy it was. Because I was curious. It was a big camera, and I'd never seen a camera like that. And I was curious as to how much it weighed. And Darlene Dunham told me, with a grin on her face, that it's not her camera, and she borrowed it, and she can't let me carry it for that reason. And she was pulling the photogenic photos that she took out of that camera during this, and she was stuffing the photogenic photos that she took into an envelope. So I asked Darlene Dunham. I knew she was taking photos of me and her children while we were picking up those candy bars. And so I asked Darlene Dunham if I could have one of those photos. I'm only a 6-year-old kid, okay? And I knew damn well she was taking photogenic photos of me, so I asked if I could have one. And she grinned at me in a smirking way and told me that I can't have these photos. These are special photos, is what she told me. So I was asking questions the entire time because I had no clue what was going on. I knew what they just did. But I didn't perceive what they just did as a crime taking place. And because I was only 6 years old, I had no understanding or concept of doubles. I had no understanding or concept of framing. I had no understanding of that concept at all. My perception of the events was, here's how I perceived it. Here's how I perceived that event. I perceived that event as a nice lady taking me for a walk. Nice lady took me to meet a nice man. Nice man gave us all candy bars. And then nice lady took me home again. Nice lady took photos of this, and then nice lady took me home again. That's how I perceived the event. I was only 6 years old at the time. I had no understanding or concept of crime or framing. I had no clue what the hell was going on. But I never forgot that day. I never forgot what happened, and I never forgot what they said. I never forgot the questions I was asking them. This was my introduction day to the Dunham family. And that camera Darlene Dunham was using was all metal, all green, very large, very stands out like a sore thumb. I was very curious about it because it was such a big-ass camera. It had a round yellow Multnomah County Sheriff's seal on it. Being only 6 years old at the time, I had no idea what that seal stood for. But I remember seeing the seal on that camera and remembering what it looks like. I didn't know what it represented at the time. I seen that county sheriff officer that was in that house that was tossing out those damn candy bars in his uniform, his Multnomah County Sheriff uniform. But I'm only 6 years old at the time, so I didn't understand what that uniform represented. But I never forgot what his uniform looked like. I never forgot what the seal on that camera looked like. And I noticed there was a green car parked in front of that house, and it had lights on it, like a cop car. But it was an all-green car. So I noticed that as well. But keep in mind, at the time, I didn't know what a county sheriff officer was. I didn't have any understanding of doubles or framing people. I had no understanding of any of that. And I basically witnessed the whole damn thing and just was too young and immature to understand what I witnessed. What I witnessed was the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham's family framing a neighbor as a pedophile. And they took control of the person that they're framing. They took control of that person's home, either when that person was incarcerated or when that person is away on a trip or when that person's away at work. I don't know the circumstances as to the person who lived there. But obviously the person that lived there was not at their home at that time. County sheriffs were in physical possession of this home. They had county sheriff vehicles parked in front of that home, and there was a county sheriff officer that was inside the home that was tossing out the candy bars. And it was Darlene Dunham who was taking the photogenic photos of him doing so. And he was deliberately keeping his uniform body away from the window, and he only kept his arm visible in front of the window. Now, I witnessed this when I was 6 years old. I can testify in great detail to what they did, what they said, what the camera looked like, what the county sheriff officer's vehicle looked like, what the uniformed county sheriff officer was wearing, and what it looked like. I mean, I can describe in detail. I can describe practically exactly where Darlene Dunham was standing when they took the photogenic photos. So, I never forgot it. I never forgot what they did. I just was too young to understand. I perceived the event as a nice lady takes me for a walk. The nice lady takes me and her children to meet a nice man. The nice man started giving us candy bars, and the nice lady was taking photos of it, and then the nice lady took us home again. That is how I perceived the event, the situation, the incident. Now, I was only 6 years old when this occurred. I had no understanding or concept of crime or the concept of framing. I had no idea that this officer was acting as a double of somebody that lived there. It was years later when I found out that what a pedophile was. I didn't even know what the hell a pedophile was until I was like 10 or something. I don't know. And that's when I realized. When I realized what that word pedophile meant, that's when. And I think I was like 10 when I finally found out what that word meant. That's when I realized they framed the person that lived there. And it wasn't until that moment when I realized it. Because I had no clue. I knew damn well it was a county sheriff officer that was in that house, and that he was tossing his candy bars. I realized what he was when I was I think 8 years old. I think I saw a county sheriff officer on TV. It was either that or I think I saw a county sheriff officer on TV with their vehicles, and then you could see their yellow gold seal that they have on their vehicles or whatnot, and or on. I was watching a news commercial or something, and there was a county sheriff's officer or something making some sort of a statement to the news media, and that's when I realized, oh gee, that dude that was tossing candy bars at us, he's a county sheriff officer. So understanding on my part didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of years for me to figure out what I witnessed. Because I didn't even know what the hell a county sheriff officer was. I had no clue. Keep in mind, this was the early 70s. We didn't even have a TV back in '71. I think we got our first TV that I can remember back in '72, I think. We didn't even have a TV, so I was not very aware of at the meager age of me being just 6 years old. At that meager age, I had really no understanding of what the fuck was going on. And basically, the Dunhams and the county sheriff used me in that sting operation to frame a neighbor as a pedophile. And I was just too damn young to understand what the hell was going on. But I never fucking forgot it. It was such a weird day that I never forgot. And I never forgotten how they celebrated after they got done framing that neighbor. They were celebrating right in front of my face. They were celebrating. And they were openly referring to the person that lived there as a pedophile from that point forward. Literally, on the walk of taking me back home, when they're on the walk, we're just a block away from my home when they did this, and it's just they only have to take me one block to take me back home, and it's on this fucking walk where they're celebrating and they're openly referring to the person that lived at that house as a pedophile. Now, when I got home, I walked into my home. I had several candy bars in my hands. that the county sheriff officer tossed at us. And I was munching on candy bar when I walked into my home. And my mother took one look at me, and she saw me holding several candy bars and seeing me munching on candy bars. She's like, "Where did you get all those candy bars?" And now keep in mind, my perception of what occurred was, nice lady took me for a walk, nice lady took us to meet nice man gave us candy bars, nice lady took photos of it, and then nice lady took me home. That's how I perceived the event. And Darlene Dunham and her children were openly referring to the person that lived there as they were taking me back home, as they're walking me back home, as a pedophile. So, and I had no understanding of what that word meant. So I said to my mother, this lady took us to meet a nice pedophile. He gave us the candy bars. And that's basically how I referred to it. And I didn't think of that word as a bad word because I didn't even know what the hell it even meant. All I know is my mother just asked me where I got the candy bars, so I had to tell her. And the person that gave me the candy bars, Darlene Dunham and her children were openly referring to this person as a pedophile. So I referred to him as one, not knowing what it meant. Now, when I said this to my mother's jaw dropped. Her jaw dropped. Her jaw might as well just hit the floor at that moment. And in anger and in shock, she said to me, "Stay right there." And then she bolted at the door to go after the Dunhams. I'm going to have to assume that the Dunhams live 2 houses away from ours. And I'm going to have to assume that the county sheriff officer that was in that house a block away and had his county sheriff vehicle parked in front of that house left that house and got in his vehicle and drove to Darlene Dunham's house and was waiting for Darlene Dunham to come back so that he can retrieve his camera and he can retrieve the photogenic photos she took. And I'm going to have to assume that this is why or how the circumstances of which my mother confronted them. And I don't know what story they told my mother. I'm pretty damn sure they lied to my mother about what actually happened. And when my mother came back from confronting the Dunhams, she seemed to be satisfied with their answers that they gave her, and therefore she didn't question me any further as to what happened. I wish she would have, because if she did question me further, she would have realized that these people just framed a neighbor. But because she didn't question me, she wasn't asking me any details about it. She didn't ask me any more about it. So I figured, okay, everything's fine. Everything's okay. So I wasn't worried about it. Keep in mind, my perception of the events was nice lady took me for a walk. Nice lady took us to meet a nice man. Nice man gave us candy bars. Nice lady took photos of it. And then nice lady took us home. That was my perception of that day. On that very day. Okay, I had no understanding or concept of crime or the concept of framing. I had no fucking clue. But now the Dunhams and the county sheriffs are aware of the fact that I'm a witness to what they did and am a witness to them referring to the person that lived there as a pedophile. From this point forward, me and my whole family became targeted by the Dunham family and by the Multnomah County Sheriffs, and we were being targeted by sting operations ever since. Ever since. So I am very familiar with their tactics and their mindsets behind their tactics, and how they use organized staging, and where they stage events, they stage crimes, and then they just give their targets to blame. And they all simply agree to lie in order to put blame on their targets. Now, for all intents and purposes, the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family framed that neighbor of ours that lived a block away. And they used me in that sting. And they inadvertently gave me too much information, because it was Darlene Dunham's children that started referring to the person there that lived there as a pedophile. And apparently they weren't supposed to have done that in my presence, since they used me in this operation of theirs. So technically I'm a witness to the fact that they framed that neighbor as a pedophile, and how I'm a witness to how they did it, and they fucking used me in that operation. Now, I became targeted by the Dunhams and the county sheriffs ever since, and I was completely oblivious to this fact. My family was oblivious to this fact. 10 days after that incident, and I'm guesstimating 10 days based on my memory of the events back then, a county sheriff detective, not in uniform but dressed like a detective, came to our door. And he was acting all gruffy and acting like he owned our home, literally. And started making coercive demands, demanding that my mother let him into our home so that he could inspect our basement. And my mother didn't want to let him in, but he was insisting in a coercive, threatening manner. Now, the only people that were home was me and my mother. And my mother was afraid of this man, so she grudgingly let the man enter. She let the detective enter our home out of fear of this person. And the person, as he wanted to know where the basement was, my mother showed him where the basement door was, so he started going down the basement, and he insisted that my mother go down the basement with him, and he insisted that I don't go down the stairs with them. So I had to stay on the main floor. And they were down there for about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. And then they came back up and from the basement, and the county sheriff went out the front door, left, and my mother was scared of this person. Now, I don't know what this county sheriff officer said to my mother. My mother was, come on, I'm only 6 years old. My mother's not going to turn to me for her defense, okay? She's scared of this person, and she's taking it in terms of trying to protect me. And she told me, don't ever answer the door ever again. And she wasn't angry at me. She was just scared of this detective. I don't know what they said, but I'm going to have to assume some sort of threats were made, or possible hints of threats were made by that detective. And from this point forward, Darlene Dunham took it upon herself to start befriending my mother. They were heavily targeting my mother at this point, and Darlene Dunham was befriending my mother, was pretending to be a friend. She was doing all kinds of things, like bringing over leftovers from their dinners and stuff like that to our house and stuff. They were doing this kind of stuff. All these friendly gestures as a way of winning my mother over as a friend. And this went on for a couple weeks, and Darlene Dunham was calling my mother regularly on the phone, and my mother started calling Darlene Dunham regularly on the phone, and so my mother is under the impression at this point that they're like friends, because Darlene Dunham's putting on the appearance that she wanted to be friends with my mother and was giving my mother that false belief. And after a couple weeks of this, Darlene Dunham started asking my mother if she could take me to the movie theaters with her children. And at this point, my mother trusted Darlene Dunham. My mother thought that they were friends. So she agreed to that. And because I was under the false belief that my mother and Darlene Dunham were friends, I trusted them. I didn't want to, assume anything bad or malicious about these people. Keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old, okay? Whoever my mother puts me in charge of, that's who has charge of me. So when my mother agreed, then Darlene Dunham and her children started taking me to the movie theaters. This is 1971 when that occurred. And they were not taking me to see appropriate movies for children at all. They were taking me and their children to see very inappropriate, stinking ass movies. And I can't remember the names of all the movies that they were taking me to see, but they were very bad, very inappropriate type of movies. The type of movies that had nude scenes, the type of movies that had rape and murder scenes. There was one movie that it was like a it's like one of those teenager movies where it's all about the beach scenes or something. The movie started out where there was some woman that was topless on a beach, laying on a beach, and she was topless, laying on a towel, and a dog comes up to the lady while she's laying on a towel and grabs her top strap and runs off with the top strap, and the lady is chasing the dog down the beach while the dog is holding the bathing suit top, and the camera's like going slow-mo on the woman's boobs as she's running down the damn beach chasing after the dog. Now, this is the type of movies Darlene Dunham was taking me and her children to see. And Darlene Dunham waited for that entire scene to finish in its entirety before she took us out of that theater. And the only reason she took us out of the theater was virtually empty. There was like 3 other people that were in the theater, and they were like near the front of the theater. And Darlene Dunham insisted that we sit in the back of the theater, and we had to have the same seats over and over again. And the people that were sitting more closer towards the front of the theater, they noticed that Darlene Dunham had her children and me in this theater for this particular movie, and they started verbally complaining and about it, and were upset about it. And Darlene Dunham was very nervous about this, but she waited for that entire scene to finish before she told me and her children to get up, and we left the theater. Now, I need to point out the fact that there is very the reason I can remember all this so clearly because there's so much that was being repeated over and over again. Every time Darlene Dunham took us to the movie theaters, she had to have the same seats over and over and over and over again. And she insisted that I sit on the end aisle. I had to sit at the end aisle, the very end, where I'm right next to the aisle, and that there had to be an empty seat in between me and Darlene Dunham. And then Darlene Dunham kept her children on the other side of her. And this is the seating arrangement that she insisted on repeatedly. This was a repeated process. She was a stickler for it. If I tried to sit in a different seat, she would snap at me and get angry and insist I have to sit in that seat. So I'm quite literally being made to sit by myself and sit separate from the Dunhams each and every time. And there was a time where she took us to the movie theater, and there were already there was a couple that were already in the seats that Darlene Dunham always insisted on having. And she started to request that these people move because she needed to have these seats, and she was literally telling them she needs to have these seats. And they were smirking at Darlene Dunham and saying, "There's plenty of seats here. You can go sit down. You don't need these seats here." And so Darlene Dunham told her son to take me to the bathroom. And when we came back from the bathroom, Darlene Dunham had those seats. So Darlene Dunham was a stickler for insisting on these seats. She had to have these very same seats each and every fucking time. Now, this was a repeated process that happened each and every time she took us to the movie theaters. And each and every time, and there were several times this happened. She took us to see several movies over several different occasions. This was a repeated process. Each and every time, as soon as the lights go out and they start playing the beginning commercials, where they're showing the premieres of upcoming movies, stuff like that, before they start playing the main movie, some guy would walk into because during the commercials in the movie theater, that's when the lights go out. And as soon as the lights went out, some dude, remember, they had me sitting on the aisle seat at the very back of the theater. And right as the lights would go out, some dude would walk into the theater, walk down the aisle, walk right past me, get several feet ahead of me. He'd turn around, snap a flashbulb photogenic photo at me in my direction, and then he would walk right back out of the theater. Now, that was also a repeated process. So, the seating arrangements that Darlene Dunham insisted on, and this dude walking in during the commercials and turning around, snapping a photo, this was a repeated process over and over again. Keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. I don't understand what the hell is going on. The last disgusting, sick-ass movie that Darlene Dunham took us to was the movie Basket Case. Yeah, the Basket Case. Darlene Dunham made us sit through that entire fucking movie. We were sitting in the same seats, just like Darlene Dunham always insisted on. Only this time, instead of the dude walking into the theater when the commercials play, it can get several feet ahead and turn around, snap a photo, and then leave. Instead of that happening, This time, that dude is sitting in the very chair in front of me in that movie theater. He was sitting directly in front of me. And when the rape scene in the movie Basket Case showed up, Darlene Dunham told me to close my eyes. Or not to close my eyes. She told me to cover my eyes. So I did what she said. I covered my eyes. I closed my eyes. And the moment I covered my eyes, I can hear the dude that's sitting in the chair directly in front of mine getting up from his chair and then standing up and then turning around, and then he gets back onto his chair, and next thing I know, I'm hearing flash bulb cameras, flash bulb flashes going off, and I could see, even though my eyes are closed and my hands are covering my eyes, I could see the bright flash of a flash bulb going off right in front of my face. So I peeked to see what the fuck was going on. I knew it was the dude that was sitting in front of me. And I peeked to see this dude. He's in the chair in front of me, but he's on his knees in that chair, and he's actually facing me, and he's got this big-ass fucking camera in his goddamn hands that takes those flash bulb, that has a flash bulb thing to it. And he's like right in my face. He's about as close as to my face as my hand right now is to my face. And he had a camera right in my fucking face. And he noticed I was peeking. And he said out loud to Darlene Dunham, he said, "He's peeking at the movie." And Darlene Dunham laughed at that. They were both laughing at that. They thought it was funny. I'm not peeking at the damn fucking movie. I was peeking at the son of a bitch that turned around and started snapping photogenic photos at my face while my hands are covering my eyes. Now, I think I've given you enough information to know about the Multnomah County Sheriff officers and their civilian sting operatives and their tactics they use. This is 1971 and 1972. Now, after that crap with that stinking-ass movie Basket Case, from that point forward, Darlene Dunham started inviting my mother to come along with her to the movie theaters. And so now, instead of it just being me and Darlene Dunham and Darlene Dunham's children, now it's me and my mother and Darlene Dunham and her children. And now that they started bringing my mother along, we started watching decent Disney movies. The first movie we went to see, where my mother was brought along, was a Disney movie with Tim Conway and Don Knotts. It was like a cowboy type of a movie. And ironically, this time, before the lights even went out, and people are still just filing into the theater. Ironically, Darlene Dunham still insisted on the same seats. Only this time, that empty seat that's in between me and Darlene Dunham, this time, my mother's in the empty seat. And as usual, Darlene Dunham insisted on the same fucking seats. She's a stickler for it. She was making it very clear to my mother she has to have these back seats in the very back row. And so we're still all in our same seats that we always take, with the exception of now that my mother is along. My mother now is sitting in the empty seat. And before the lights even go out in the movie theater, there's this dude in plain clothing, but I know damn well he's in law enforcement, standing by me right there in the aisleway, and he's using hand gestures over at Darlene Dunham. And the moment he does this, and Darlene Dunham notices it, that's when Darlene Dunham draws my mother's attention. And Darlene Dunham's saying to my mother, "Look over there on this side of the theater. Look at those people over there. Look at them." And so my mother was leaning forward and looking over at these people on this side of the theater. And as this is occurring, the dude that's standing at the aisle here starts walking down the aisle, gets several feet ahead of me, turns around, snaps a photogenic photo in our direction, and then he walks back out of the theater. Now, that should be enough for you to know that the county sheriffs and the Dunham's family are very photogenic, photo-oriented, and deliberately will stage events and repeat events over and over in order to set people up as pedophiles, and that they even go so far as to use doubles, because the county sheriff officer himself was acting as a double to frame a neighbor. And these were the tactics that they were using to set me and my mother up after the fact. Now, I'm going to have to end this video not because I want to, I know it's long, but I don't want to end it. I want to continue explaining this shit, but I'm almost out of memory. This crappy cell phone can only record for so long, and then it doesn't even give me a warning that it's about ready to cut off. I know it's getting close to cutting off, so I'm just going to have to end this vlog for now.